Good evening, everyone. My name is Russ Petrus, and I am Executive Director of FutureChurch. And with me on tonight's call are Martha Liggis and Olivia Hasty, our two fabulous program associates. And on behalf of both of us, welcome and thank you for being here. Whether this is your fourth time coming to our Pride series this year, whether this is your first time on a Future Church program, or whether you're a longtime participant in Future Church programs, we're glad you're here. And please know that this is a safe and a welcoming space for you to be who you are and to be loved and cherished. It's really good to gather, especially tonight on this 10th anniversary of marriage equality here in the United States with the Obergefell decision. And I remember that day very vividly for myself. I was at work when the decision came down, and on my way home, I stopped at Dairy Queen, and I had them decorate a cake, a Dairy Queen ice cream cake with a big rainbow, and then they put all sort of rainbow confetti um, icing on the side of it. And then my now husband and a friend of ours enjoyed enjoyed some ice cream cake. And then I remember there was dancing in the streets. I remember just what a beautiful day that was. And it makes me hopeful for more decisions like that, more progress like that for women, for the LGBTQ community, for our friends of color. If we just allow equality and justice and love and compassion to lead the way. So tonight we gather in a celebratory tone and hopefully with some hope in the midst of this darkness that we are currently living. I think with that, I will turn things over to Martha, who will lead us in our opening prayer.
Thank you so much, Russ. And thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. It's great to celebrate with you. Tonight feels like a celebration of love and of joy. It was really an honor to write this prayer, and this is the prayer that we've used for all four of the presentations in our Pride series. It's called Praying with Pride. And so if we can all take a moment to just let ourselves arrive. I think it's easy to feel disconnected when we're alone in a room looking at a screen, but we're not. We're together in this moment, in our intention and our prayer. So let us pray. God of many names and many pronouns, it is through you that we are each beautifully and wonderfully made. You formed us out of love and knew of our goodness before we even took our first breath. You know us and you love us. May we show ourselves that very same love. When we're learning who we are, may we love ourselves as you love us. When we're pushed to the margins, may we love ourselves as you love us. When we discover new things about ourselves, may we love ourselves as you love us. And when others are learning who they are, may we love them as you love them. When they've been pushed to the margins, may we love them as you love them. When they discover new things about themselves, may we love them as you love them. This Pride Month, may we be rooted in the vastness of your love, feeling the embrace of arms that stretch to hold all sexes, all genders, all people. And we ask all this through all of your holy names. Amen.
Thank you, Martha, for that prayer. and for bringing us into this space. I am really looking forward to tonight's event, and I have the real honor of introducing our moderator, um, and who is my colleague and friend from Boston College, which is a real treat. So joining us tonight as our moderator is Nick Fagnant, who is a queer theologian, Ignatian educator, and public scholar committed to justice, relationality, and belonging in Catholic education. Nick is a PhD student in theology and education at Boston College, Clough School of Theology and Ministry, and his research integrates Ignatian spirituality, LGBTQ plus perspectives, and critical pedagogy to advance theological education rooted in solidarity and human flourishing. At Boston College, Nick teaches God, Self, and Society, an undergraduate theology course, serves as a TA under the mentorship of Khaled Keefe Perry, and his writing has appeared in Commonweal Magazine, Outreach, and New Ways Ministry, where he explores LGBTQ plus theology, the radical hospitality of the gospel, and the transformative power of storytelling and shaping faith and education. Nick is a lover of speculative fiction and a proud dog dad, and brings creativity and relational depth to classrooms, workshops, and public discourse, sparking dialogue that inspires meaningful growth. We are so grateful to have him here with us tonight. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you all. I was already a little nervous and kind of sweating a bit in this blazer in the third story of my apartment in Dorchester, which just had this like massive heat wave, and with a long bio, just sweating even more now. So I'm so excited. I'm so filled with joy to be here to help moderate, facilitate our conversation. With these amazing LGBTQ confirm language. Great. LGBTQ plus Catholic folks. I will introduce them in a second. We are going to ask them to share in a moment about 6 to 8 minutes each of just their stories of what does it mean for them to be queer and Catholic, especially kind of through this lens of the celebration of queer faith, of queer love, of queer joy. Rightly so. So much of what we do is in dealing with the nitty-gritty of how do we respond to a lot of the suffering in the world, specifically of LGBTQ plus kids. And in the US right now, that is more important than ever. And as I think about what pride means to me, and especially queer pride, as a gay cis man, I was nervous about coming into Pride this year, thinking about like this is all great, but like Pride is a protest. What do we do? How do we change the world? There's real work that needs to be done. And I had a friend who is Southern Baptist, and she shared with me. She's like, Nick, like it's like you want to dismantle the system. Like your queer joy is necessary for that. Like the queer love, just itself, and celebrating it itself, and centering these stories. That itself is what will usher in the reign of God. So I'm excited for the next just over an hour to be with folks where we can hear these stories and find these moments of peace, of love, of joy, of faith, so that all of us together can build the church and build the reign of God. And so I'd like to introduce our first folks. I'll introduce all three folks and then call on our first folks to speak. First, Evil's here. All right. Ariell Watson Simon and Rochelle Simon are both lay Catholic ministers who live in rural Missouri. Ariell is a board-certified healthcare chaplain, and Rochelle works in nonprofits. And like with Olivia, both have degrees from Boston College and School of Theology and Ministry, so we're excited about that. And I also want to introduce M. Hakes, pronouns they, them, or Zer. M is a queer, non-binary lay Catholic. In both their paid and volunteer work, they're active at the intersection of faith, queerness, engaged in works of justice and liberation, and specifically enjoys times knitting and crocheting, out in the garden, and just being outside enjoying creation. In our third set, we have Andy Beagle Rieger and his dad, Ed. Andy is an associate professor of religious studies and a Catholic theologian at Mount St. Joseph's University in Cincinnati. He focuses on how the Catholic dogmatic tradition and the LGBTQ experience and thought how they can bring new insights into the church. Andy and his husband Stephen live with their son, their dog, and their canary in Ohio. And his father, Ed, alongside him. Ed Beagle and his wife, Kathleen, live in Kentucky. They love and are very proud of all their children, their grandchildren, and their in-laws. Ed has served on the board of Fortunate Family for over 10 years and is currently its president. He also facilitates a group called Catholics Embracing All God's Children. It's a support group for LGBTQ plus Catholic individuals and their allies in Kentucky. So I am going to welcome everyone, and I'm going to get us rolling with Ariell and Rochelle. The floor is yours, my friends. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for all those introductions. So as Nick said, there's a lot that can be said about a life, two lives, and how they intertwine. But I'm going to focus just kind of on talking about kind of that Catholic and queer identity and what that's looked like. So I grew up in Columbia, Maryland, outside Washington, D.C., in a Protestant household, actually. My family are very active Protestant lay ministers. And it was a very heteronormative space. So I was not really given any opportunity to question my sexuality or to think about it really until I was in my 20s. But prior to that, I had another coming out experience, which was after I attended Loyola University in Maryland for college. So my undergrad was at a Catholic institution, Jesuit institution. And while I was there, I absolutely fell in love with Catholic social teaching and with the Catholic intellectual tradition, which just something clicked for me. And I felt a really strong call to enter the Catholic Church. And so that was a transformative experience for me. I came home one Thanksgiving and told my family that I was becoming Catholic. And it did not go well. I learned a lot about what not to do when coming out to people. With, like, for example, not sitting your entire family down around the Thanksgiving table and telling them big news. Lesson learned. But, years later, like, a lot of people have asked me why I stay Catholic as a queer person. And for me, the question is actually kind of the opposite, because I discerned being Catholic. That was a very clear call from God that I feel like I had in my life, to be a part of this church in all of its imperfections. And then as I started to grapple with my sexuality and as that experience unfolded in my life and then our relationship, I've always known, like, this is how God calls me to be a queer person, and this is how God calls me to be a Catholic person, is to find the integration of those. So over to Rochelle.
Yeah, so I grew up in rural Missouri in a Catholic household, and was just very invested in my faith as a young child. I always joke around, I was like the WWJD kid with the wristbands, and very invested in youth groups, and was very committed to my faith as a Catholic. And I went on to Jesuit college, Rockhurst in Kansas City, and I would say went on to do JVC in year of service, and after that went on to work in nonprofits, and then became a campus minister in St. Louis. And so for me, I've always felt a very big core identity and calling to ministry, to be a Catholic lay person, to be very invested in the church. Felt very close relationship with God and calling around that. And so my sexuality was something that, slowly unfolded. I feel like as I got into my college years and beyond in my 20s, became to understand myself as being, I fall in love with people. I really love people. And so I have an identity of being attracted to many different folks. And for myself, I name that as bisexuality. And so I knew that, but I really felt like, man, I'm called to ministry. And I was a very joyful single person. I didn't think I would ever get married. And so I was just doing my thing, being called to ministry. I knew that I had this identity of being queer and bisexual, but shared it with some folks, but it was not a primary identity for me. And so very much felt like we both ended up at Boston College. And so I'll let Ariell kind of share a little bit about our experience there.
Yeah, so we met actually while both in our Masters of Divinity studies at Boston College. And so Rochelle was in her third year of the program. I was in my first. I thought that she was really amazing and a really great potential mentor. And that was not what she was thinking. We find out later. But we lived together. We were roommates for a year and then sort of figured out, I think maybe there's something more here. And sort of fumbled our way through trying to figure that out. At the same time that Rochelle was also transitioning, graduating, and moving to Indiana to take a job working at Notre Dame, which is perhaps not most people's ideal time to come out.
Yeah, my friend said, "You're nothing if not bold, Rochelle. Taking a job at Notre Dame as a rector, as a live-in, ministering to 270 college-age women, forming Christian community, and deciding at the same time to pursue a long-distance relationship with a woman." I felt really, at that point in my life, I felt like, what does it mean to say no to love? To me, love and God are the same. So saying yes is an important piece of that, no matter what's at stake and no matter what the unknowns may be. So saying yes to what that might look like. And so we were in what we call long distance relationship. As she finished up, we visited one another and our relationship kind of grew. But also for me, kind of thinking about how, as I say yes to our relationship, as I say yes to love, as I say yes to the movement of the Spirit, how that might impact my own ministry and what I am sort of allowed to do in certain spaces. And so discerning our engagement meant that I was not able to continue as a rector at Notre Dame in ministry. But it did mean that there was a lot of other things that I could always do. I always know that there's ways to minister beyond that. And so I wanted Ariell to share a little bit about how we discerned marriage, because I think that's good too.
Yeah, so I think we didn't take for granted that that was where this journey led. And I famously said a few months into our relationship, I wasn't sure whether to kind of continue with it. And I said, I know that there's no happy ending to this story. And that was really what it felt like, is like, we can do this for a while, but at some point it's going to get hard and it's going to get ugly and there's going to be a lot of people hurt. And I look back at that and I remember standing there on our wedding day and looking out over like all the people supporting us and thinking, this is a happy ending. It's not without pain. It's not without a lot of bumps along the road and a lot of sacrifices too. But it is still a pretty happy ending. So, our discernment really was figuring out what we believe Christian marriage to be. And what does it, we take seriously this very Catholic idea of marriage as a vocation. And so we were like, okay, so do we have a vocation of marriage? What does that mean? And so we went on some retreats together and like prayed a lot about and read a lot of books, because we're very nerdy, like about Christian marriage, and said, what does this mean for us to have this calling? How can we be better together? How can we be stronger as a unit? And how can we be better disciples and ministers because of being a part of each other's lives? And so we really discerned that that was the case and that that was something we needed to do. So then in actually like having a wedding and doing all of that, we really wanted that to be reflective of the fullness of our relationship. And also the fullness of relationships in our lives. So my family is not supportive of the romantic aspect of our relationship. They think Rochelle's great, but because she is, that's pretty unobjectionable. But don't support our marriage. And so we actually had a civil ceremony separate from our wedding. That was something that certain people in our lives felt like they could attend if they couldn't attend a formal wedding. And then we had a wedding celebration that looked maybe more like what you might expect. And then we had a Catholic Mass. And so we felt like those were three snapshots that individually represented all the fullness of what marriage means to us. And it breaks our hearts that all three of those could not be integrated as one celebration in the way that it is so often for straight couples. But we really believe in like living into what is today, the already but not yet. And so we got to do that by having these three different slices of what our relationship is and how community can celebrate it, that together sort of made a composite image of what we know our relationship to be. Do you want to talk about life since then?
Sure, yeah. So we now live back at my
Apologies, can we actually hit pause on that? I said that I would message folks with like a minute to go. I don't have that feature, so I apologize for not messaging you.
We're good.
I definitely want to hear that story, I promise you.
No,
Are you able to share it briefly and then we can move on?
yeah, no, that's fine. The brief version is that we now live in rural Missouri, in my hometown, which has it's beautiful. It's great. It has its challenges always in being who we are, but we always like to say that naturally, I think we appreciate relationship across difference, and it's something that we value a lot. And so we do that in a variety of different ways. But yeah, more to come. It's a teaser. We'll talk more. Thanks.
It's incredible. Thank you both. And folks, if you have any questions that pop up, feel free to put them right in the chat. If you don't want to raise your hand later, and we will make sure that we hold on to those. And it's time for us to now move on to M. Hakes. And so again, my friend, the floor is yours.
So I, similar to Ariell, was not raised Catholic. I was raised Baptist, and raised in a really religious home. Rochelle, I also really relate to like being the youth group kid and my WWJD bracelet, and I was on fire with my faith, and I also knew that I was queer. I had known for a long time. I remember thinking back in like second or third grade how I liked some of the boys in my class. And I remember even back then feeling like that was wrong. So even at that point, it had been instilled in me that this heteronormative narrative had to win out. And it wasn't until I got to college. I came out to some friends in high school, but kept it very hush hush for my family. But when I got to college, one of my friends who was Jewish said, you know, you can be queer and you can be religious. And that was groundbreaking for me. I actually considered converting to Judaism. I practiced Judaism for a year, and realized at that point that I liked bacon and I liked Jesus, and I wasn't able to give those up yet. And it's funny, now I'm a vegetarian, so the bacon's out. But I decided I needed to find something within my own tradition, and I had really grown to love the liturgy of the Jewish faith, and started to search that out within Christianity. Thought about becoming Catholic at that point, but was just a leap too far for a little Baptist kid to become a Catholic all of a sudden. So I joined Catholic Light. I became a Lutheran. All the liturgy, half the guilt. And I really appreciated that time, but really desired the liturgy. I love Mass. I love the Eucharist, and felt myself drawn more and more to that. And so started going to both Mass and to my Lutheran church. And it was when the translation changed back in 2011 that I was like, oh, now I'm getting confused at which church I'm at. both things are coming out of my mouth and I don't know what to do. So I decided I needed to make a decision, and finally decided to become a Catholic. But I also wrestled with this idea of like, why would I leave one denomination that says I am whole and loved as I am, and go to a denomination that says that something about me is intrinsically disordered. And I really struggled with that as I was going through RCIA. And when I said at my reception into the church that I believe everything that the Holy Catholic Church believes, I added in my head with a caveat, insofar as my conscience allows me to, just because I couldn't say that I was intrinsically disordered. I think since then, that was back in 2012 that I became a Catholic. Since then, it's been growing into both my queer identities and my Catholic identity. My queer identities, in 2020, I came out as trans non-binary. So my poor parents, they keep having these coming out stories of me becoming a Catholic, of me being queer, of me being trans non-binary. Finally, there was one morning I didn't eat ham with breakfast, and my mom said, "What, are you becoming a vegetarian now?" And I said, yes, I am. And she said, "Now that's just a straw too far." But I think the great joy and love that I experience simply by being myself and being fully who I am, unapologetically queer, unapologetically Catholic, even when that's difficult in both spaces. In queer spaces, sometimes I feel like I need to leave my Catholicism at the door. And in Catholic spaces, I sometimes feel like I need to leave my queerness at the door. And I think growing more and more into myself over these last 13 years, I've really come to a place of I show up as myself, wholly as myself, because I'm holy and beautifully and wonderfully made. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say at this moment, Nick.
Thank you so much. Really grateful, glad you're here. So beautiful. I love the embodied aspects. All right, my friends, we're going to shift now to Andy and Ed.
Thanks. We appreciate being here. I want to say just a few things of my story before Andy gets into his. I went through a divorce about 25 years ago. And in connection with that, I got into a men's group, and there was a gay man in that group. And it was the first time I knew that I knew somebody who was gay. And he didn't fit my stereotypes. So then I just throw the stereotypes away and just look at the person. And I am so glad I had that experience before Andy came out. The other thing of going through divorce, I realized how important our stories are and how important it is that we are willing to share our stories, because I was helped by so many other people's stories who were further along in the process of going through the divorce and then getting to know yourself, and just really appreciate that, and I'm an open book. I'll tell anybody anything. So with that, take it away, Andy.
Hi. Kind of going off of that, one of the things that because of Dad and my mom and our families, I was raised Catholic, and it was always an important part of me. I don't remember a time where I ever didn't think of myself in that way. In fact, I even remember our next door neighbor, when I was 6 or 7, we were getting their mail because they were on vacation, and they got a letter from their Baptist church. And I didn't know what to do with that, because I'm like, there are people who aren't Catholic. It was kind of a new thing. So it's been very, very ingrained. And for me, when it comes to my queerness and my faith, it has been There's an old Simpsons episode that ends with the line, alcohol is both the cause of and the solution to everyone's problems. And I kind of think the same thing about Catholicism sometimes. It both tends to do a lot of the problem part, but also has a lot of the solution built in within it too. So in one way, my Catholicism growing up, I was not at all comfortable with being gay and did a very good job of not even acknowledging that about myself for a long way. And the church was very helpful in that. So for the first 22 years of my life, I just assumed I was going to be a priest because I think that in hindsight, that was my way of not having to deal with that. If you're going to be celibate, it doesn't matter. I don't have to worry about this, think about this. But at the same time, when I began to realize that was not going to work for me, when I started to, after I finished my undergrad, and I started to teach religion in a Catholic high school, and I began to see that this issue, this question, because one of the classes I had to teach was basically like introduction to sexuality to freshmen in high school, that when I got to this part of Catholic teaching, the part that Ed mentioned, the intrinsically disordered, all of that, I could tell that there were students who were in pain from that. And I could tell that from my own inability to really come to terms with this, I couldn't do anything for them. I couldn't be there for them. I couldn't console them. I couldn't even just listen because I was too conflicted myself to know what to do with that. In a very, very long but made concise story, basically led to a nervous breakdown. My second year teaching went into a really, really deep depression. Couldn't actually teach for the first, we were on a trimester system. I would have panic attacks. And after a lot of counseling, it was basically me beginning to actually force myself to be like, you have to look at this, you have to deal with this. And at first, my concern was, I don't know what to do with this as being a Catholic. But then one of the things that I find most helpful and beautiful about the Catholic tradition is precisely that it is a tradition, if not even a multitude of traditions, which means that within there was a lot of stuff that actually also was really helpful. There were a lot of aspects that were problematic, lots of Vatican documents that I had a hard time working with. But then there was also Jesus, and there was this whole idea of natural law and different versions of that, and this idea of by their fruits you will know them, and beginning to realize what was actually more enlivening and allowing me to feel joy rather than kind of having to keep everything clamped down, and realizing that the tradition itself said something positive about that too, even if the people in charge of it might not recognize it, it was still there. So just being able to utilize the deeper parts of the Catholic tradition and finding consolation, kind of like what Em said in the liturgy. At this point in my life, the two things are very, very united together. I am also I guess we're probably selected because we're all in this together. We're all kind of nerds. So my first instinct was, well, I have to read a lot of. And so I went to grad school partly because I didn't know what else to do. I had friends who, interestingly, I ended up at Notre Dame for my master's because I had friends who were there. And I just sort of applied because I knew I wasn't going to be able to teach high school and figure this out. May not have been the easiest of places to choose to go and try and sort that all out. But then just kind of kept going from there, realizing that the questions that I had were ones that other people had too, and that I might be able to, not only through my story, but also through my education, try and figure out a way to make that what seems to often be the incongruity between queer and Catholic identities a little less incongruous, or at least incongruous in a helpful way. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at right now too. But we also will be happy to share, answer, whatever.
Well, now wait a minute. I get to fill in the parts. He never tells the best parts, so I get to fill them in.
He's not good at time limits.
We've got 3 minutes left. So when he had his nervous breakdown, he was just catatonic, which is anything but who Andy really is. And it took him many years of spiritual guidance and counseling to figure out that there were two things, or to discern that there were two things that caused that nervous breakdown. One, as he mentioned, was the inability to reach out to those kids who were obviously questioning their own sexuality. And the second one, he said he believed it was the Holy Spirit kicking him in the fanny, telling him you can be a good Catholic and be in a relationship. And I think that was significant for him. The other thing when he was at Notre Dame is when they came out, when the Vatican came out and said that you could not be gay and go to the seminary. And his mother called me and said, have you talked to Andy? And I said, no, I was in a meeting. He called. So she said, well, call him. He's real upset. So I called him and he didn't sound that upset. And I said, well, your mom said you were upset. And he said, well, she told me to write. And at this time, he was pretty close to the vest of who he told. And he said, I wrote and I sent it as a letter to the editor of the Notre Dame newspaper. I said, let me see that. And he sent it to me. I read it and called him back and said, well, it's fine, but anybody that reads this is going to know you're gay. And it's the first time that I heard him acknowledge, I don't care. And that was the time, at least for me, that I knew he was comfortable with who he was and was perfectly fine with that. And for me, that was a very meaningful turning point. Then he went on to Emory and got his PhD and spent 10 years trying to find someplace to teach. When your dissertation topic is a survey of queer theology, Sermon of Nazareth, a survey of queer theology, and you want to teach theology, and the Catholic schools are kind of concerned about your dissertation title. But it took him a while, but he finally found the place that is great for him, and I've talked to some of his students, and it's great for them. So couldn't be more proud of him.
Andy and Ed, thank you both. So after our initial stories, I'm going to just ask a pretty broad question, and we can let our participants kind of just popcorn their answers. We have about 20 minutes total. I've got this question. I have some other questions available. And then after that, again, folks, will do the audience Q&A. So the broad question for everyone, where has your faith kind of shown up actively in your life, specifically at that intersection of queerness and Catholicism? What does it mean for that to somehow be present and active in your lives and your relationships? If that family is biological, if that family is chosen, yeah, what does that mean for you all? Popcorn, Ariell, and Rochelle. That's the high school teacher in me.
Yeah, that's
We were trying to figure out.
We were trying to confer and figure out who's talking about what.
Well, one of the things that, the things I was thinking about, two things. I think for me, when it comes to what has my faith given me that has been that's important intersection is, there's been many times in my life where what it means to discern in the Catholic tradition has been very important in both my discernment as being Catholic, but also being queer and Catholic, and what does that mean, and all the big questions. And what I was thinking about is the importance for me, but to do one step at a time and to trust that God will give me insight. The Holy Spirit will be with me through the next thing. I think that there's been so many times in my life where whatever the answer was, whether it was like, how do you be queer and Catholic? How do you be a woman called to ministry, to the priesthood? What does that look like? How do you say yes to all of these things, right? For me, it's like you just do the next thing. And you live into it, and you listen to the Holy Spirit, and it will guide you to the next thing. Because I think that was very true in our relationship. I think that's been true in everything. I think so often we get stuck in like, well, whatever the vision is of how that will look, we can't see it because we're limited. And yet God and the abundance of who God is can hold that in a way that we just have to trust and lean into it. So at least for me, that's been a big part of all of the unfoldings in my life and in our lives, I would say.
No, I appreciate that. I think, yeah, in some ways, I feel like our journey of love and our journeys as queer people, they're faith journeys. They're journeys of faith, because choosing to be a queer Catholic person in the world is an act of faith. It is stepping out and trusting that someone, something will catch you and will hold you, even though it's terrifying. And so I think being a person of faith taught me how to do that in so many other aspects of my life. And also being a queer person has always been a part of who I am, has always given me a vulnerability that allows me to lean into God in particular ways, that I think has made me stronger as a Catholic.
Thank you both.
No, I really resonate with what you both said, especially the idea of recognizing sort of the step-by-step kind of dimension of all of this. Because I was definitely not like that for a very long time. And it was like, no, here's the next 5 years, and here's it's all mapped out, and this is what it's going to be. And then that has never worked. I've always ended up someplace where 5 years earlier, I would never have guessed that that's where I was going to end up at. And a lot of it I have found has been more recognizing God's hand and God's activity in hindsight. So I find it I tend to find it easier to look back and see how things have gone in ways that I was not understanding at the time. So even talking about like the period of those few months where I was kind of at my worst psychologically, looking back afterwards, I really began to realize that there was something. I mean, obviously, on a more personal level, but there's something of death and resurrection in that. There was something of I was dying to something and I was coming back as something else, which helped me connect in a much more visceral way to like the deeper mysteries, the deeper narratives, the deeper traditions of my faith, rather than just being something that I would profess. I began to start having an idea about what that is, and as you both said too, kind of beginning to learn how to trust that, and lean into that. I think is really important, and I think that being queer and having gone through that has been, I hope has been a very big asset, in that I do think it has helped me be more compassionate, not only toward other people who might feel like they're marginalized, but also even to those who might be the ones doing the marginalizing, because for a very long time, I did a very good job of not looking at this part of myself. And I can see how I could have gotten to be in some of these places. I look at some of the clerics who do a lot of damage, and I can see how I could have ended up in that place had things gone in a different way, which does not excuse it or make it okay. But I think it does help me to at least be able to be present a little bit more with the messiness that is the Catholic Church and all the people who are in it, from having been able to go through some of that a little bit. And I do feel like that has been, there's been grace in that, in a real sense.
And if I could just, for myself, seeing what Andy went through, I wanted to get involved in trying to prevent other people from having to go through that. And that's why when my now wife and I started dating, neither one of us knew we had gay sons. By the time we got married, we both had gay sons. So just, and again, as a number of people pointed out now, following what I believe was God's path for me in getting involved in walking in pride parades, getting involved in various support groups, getting involved with fortunate families. It was just following what to me was God's mission for me, and was thrilled to do it. Now, I do have to say one thing. One of the first pride parades I was walking in, I turned to him and said, I hope you realize that you're the reason I'm doing this. he looked at me and said, well, you're the reason I'm doing this because it really isn't my thing. So there you go.
Not a big crowd of people kind of guy. So.
Fabulous. Thank you both. M.
I just wanted to say, I think one of those places that I have really experienced little bursts of joy are those opportunities that I've had to expand somebody's understanding of queerness and Catholicism. From like a phone call that I had with the mother of a priest in a diocese that I was living in, to talking to somebody who was really struggling with their daughter coming out, to even I at one point worked in campus ministry at a Catholic university, and at being able to talk to some of the youth who were like really struggling with what it means to be Catholic and to be queer and to be this example of what it means to be openly queer and openly Catholic. Those bring some little moments, some little sparks of joy for me.
Thank you. Another question for the entire group. What is something that you hope the folks who are watching this tonight, or maybe watch the recording later, what's something that you hope that they take with them about what it means to belong, to love, to be family in the church? And in that, your hopes for the church?
I think that one of the things that I would say is that for those who are seeking and want to do that, but struggling how, is just to recognize that the church is not simply whatever the last paper that came out of Rome is, which I think is sometimes how it can feel, is like, okay, this is the current policy or whatever, or the thinking, therefore, and this is not right, this isn't good, therefore all of this must be, something, this must all be corrupted or tainted or something like that. But just recognizing that one of the advantages of being part of something that has a 2,000-year-old tradition is precisely that you can go back into it and find things from within that tradition to counter or to try and change whatever it is about the current policy thinking idea that is a problem. And that's what I mean when I say that Catholicism is, as much as it tends to give big problems, also has within its folds a lot of the potential solutions to that too, at least in my experience. And that's just one thing that I would encourage people to take seriously and look more deeply into, is not just, this bishop said this, but what deeper energies or movements of the spirit through the centuries might we be able to find that can get us into a better place.
And I think the one thing, being a parent, the one thing I hope people get is, again, from our stories, but particularly parents and loved ones of a LGBTQ plus child, the important thing is to love them, not throw them out. Andy's told me plenty of stories about people that have been thrown out of their houses because they've come out, and to support them, even if you don't understand what they're going through, support them, love them, try and understand more of who they are, and be open to the thing. I mean, and again, the stories. We've told people our stories, and fortunately the Spirit takes over once we tell them, because people have said how important and how much they got out of our stories. We didn't do anything. We just were willing to put it on the table and listen, and the Spirit took over from that. But there's far too many LGBT children, whose parents just disown them, throw them out, what have you. And unfortunately, it's 90 times out of 100 it's because of religion. And that's just so horrible.
I think something that we really hope for in our experience of church is, I guess, kind of two things. One, kind of going along with a little bit of what Andy was saying about like retrieving the resources of the tradition. I think my hope and my dream is that I, I guess I want to say that often I think that Catholics can feel like we either have to be like full throated against all LGBTQ things, or we just have to shut up and have nothing to say about it and just have to like give a silent thumbs up to people. But the reality is the tradition has so much to offer in terms of helping people with things like figuring out integrated sexuality and healthy sexuality, figuring out vocation, marriage, what it means to be married, to have support and community in that. These are not easy things for anyone, and I'm not saying that like straight Catholicism gets those right, but LGBTQ Catholic people need support in those things too, not just silence and thumbs ups, because there is so much more to be said about that. And I can't imagine our marriage without the support of our Catholic community. So many people who are there for us and who have helped us figure out how to do marriage in good times and in bad. And so that's something that I encourage you all to like be a part of, like actively support the LGBTQ people in your life, by really showing up and asking questions and helping them figure out a life of faith in the way that you would any other straight or cis friend.
Think, kind of related to that, I'd say be who you needed when you were growing up. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that thought. And I know who I needed growing up and who I can be in that way. And how can we be that for one another? How can we show one another love? How can we create space for one another to be holy ourselves? I dream of a Catholic Church where I don't have to demand space or claim space, that as a queer, trans, non-binary person, I am fully welcome and accepted and able to receive all of the sacraments, and not have some of them kept from me. It's painful at times to be part of a church that keeps you from the fullness of its beauty. So that's the church I dream of, one where we can be fully ourselves and nobody is kept out.
Thank you. Em, if it's okay, I've got a follow-up question. The stories that you have, you shared about your ministry with younger folks in the church, around this. What has it been like for you to be the family for younger folks, for other people who need it?
Yeah. I haven't thought about it in that way, and I appreciate that reframing of the relationship. I've just been so honored to be able to be part of those moments, and part of their stories, and to be a person who, like my friend Tall in college, who said you can be queer and you can be religious, to be that person for someone else, to say, no, you are fully welcome here. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yeah, there are going to be some painful moments, but that's why we have one another. That's why we have places like FutureChurch in new ways. And right there are places where we can continue to advocate for a different church, and we need you. I I've just really appreciated those moments. And Rochelle, I'll put you on the spot, and like I'm sure that you've had some moments in your own work with college students and ministry.
Yeah, I think so many of the times it's not only introducing some of the things that are helpful within our faith tradition, like the primacy of conscience or Catholic social teaching, or certain communities, certain traditions, certain schools of thought within the church to let people know that they're welcome, but also I think being able to be a model. I think people, it's like kids, if you can't see it, you can't dream it. And I think about that in our parish. We show up in rural Missouri as who we are. And I think that part of our hope for the church is that by being present, we can't be ignored. And in fact, it's like the God, I was thinking, what do I hope people do is like, let ourselves embrace the God of surprises. I think so often we keep ourselves from sort of coming out all the time in different ways and in faith spaces, and to just lean in a little bit. We've actually had some really good responses as we've shared with folks in our rural parish. And I think that it goes back to what Andy was saying, that don't let there only be one vision of church. Like there are people who go alongside us every Sunday, and maybe they've been wondering, maybe they don't like the teaching of the church around LGBTQ, and just because they don't have that identity, right, doesn't mean that they're not waiting to. Ariell had a funny experience where the choir director was just like overly excited when she shared, because she was like, "Oh, you're here." It was like, I didn't, it's like, I think that those are the moments where we have to lean in a little bit and not be afraid to be ourselves and be a little bit, it risks pain, right? But it can be so joyful, and it can be really models for folks too. So I think that for young people, we've had a lot of, young career couples who are Catholic be like, can we talk to you about that? And I think that's important, right? To just be who you are in spaces and not be afraid to chat with folks too.
Right. This is fabulous. Thank you all. It is about 8 o'clock, which means it's time to shift into the Q&A from the larger group. So I'm going to ask our future church friends to shift back so we can see everyone on the large screen. And then if you have a question, either raise your hand in person. It's probably easiest to there's if you look below on your Zoom, right, you can raise your hand via Zoom. And I will go ahead and I will facilitate this and kind of call on folks as we go. And so no one has to introduce themselves if you want to briefly introduce yourself. And I'm sure everyone has really fabulous stories. I'm going to invite the focus to be on the question for our panel. So do we have any questions from our lovely crew?
And just a reminder, if you are concerned about showing up on video, do feel free to use the chat.
Martha, please.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing. I'm really leaning into the joy tonight. And so I'd love to just pose the question, what is the best part about being queer?
I have a ready answer. It popped to mind, so I'll go with my first instinct. I think for me, it's the creativity that comes with not having a script. That it's just like, got to make it up on your own. And so that invites me to a space of creativity. I'm a fairly traditional person. And so I usually, if there is a script, I'll use it. But even take planning a wedding. It's like, well, not going to do all the normal things. So it forces me to think a little bit more deeply and to be a little bit more discerning. And I think that's true of so many things about our lives, about my life, that it invites me to some playfulness, I suppose.
I would say that at least in my experience, one of the things that, and I sort of gestured at this earlier, but one of the things that I think has gone with my queerness is it has almost forced me to look at people who otherwise I might not pay attention to. I might not, they're not within the norm, they're not what I'm used to. And it basically has almost in some ways been a school of compassion, I think, outside of simply the LGBT community, that I don't know if I necessarily would have had if I had not kind of what Ariell was saying. If I had just been able to go on the scripts for everything, I don't know if that would have been something that I would have arrived at, and I am obviously something I can always be improving in, but something that I'm very, very grateful for as well. That I just don't know to what extent that would have been there had I, not been queer.
Yeah, and I would say yes to all of that. And I've also really appreciated the family that I've gained. My family of origin, I have a rocky relationship with, and I have a really great chosen family that has been so supportive and so loving, and have really appreciated them. And so I think that's it's not a unique thing to queer folks to have chosen family. I think it's just more recognized that we sometimes have to have chosen family as opposed to our bio families. So I really appreciate my chosen family.
Thank you all. Do we have other questions? Nicole, please.
Yes, I want to thank you for sharing. Can you hear me? Okay, because my computer has been acting up. I guess one thing that I wonder how you sometimes it's hard to, I guess, continue to have faith um as a woman of color and everything that is going on in our country right now. So I commend you for being who you are and being Catholic because I struggle being Black and Catholic. My mother is diehard Catholic. We watch, or she watches EWTN, but then gets frustrated because there is racism. But homophobia, sexism, whatever. And so I guess my question is, how do you continue to stay strong in your faith, knowing how you show up every day and being authentic in your identity?
I think for me, at least, I know that I'm not alone. And what I mean by that is, yes, I have community, but also for me, when things get really hard and I feel like I have to do so much, right? I have to muster the courage. I have to muster the strength. I have to get past my own fear. I find it really helpful to remind myself that we have to, and the we in my life is the Holy Spirit and I don't do anything without the Spirit. And if I'm walking in sort of with the Spirit, then we have work to do. But it makes me feel less alone, but it also is true. And it makes me feel like what I believe to be true, that Jesus and God is with me every step of the way. So that's at least part of how I do it.
I have found, again, just speaking for myself, that again, some of the voices or the friends or the witnesses who have gone before can be really, really helpful in some of this. After the election last year, I sort of, and even though I know myself well enough that this is how I kind of go, I was still surprised to find that the first thing I felt like doing after the re-election of Trump was reread Julian of Norwich. And if you're not familiar with her, she is a 14th century mystic. We actually don't know what her name is. We call her Julian because she was an anchoress at the Church of St. Julian. and she very famously in her writings talks about how all will be well and all will be well and all manner of thing will be well, because that is that God has this great act that God will do. And if you know about her context, she was watching bodies be brought back from the Hundred Years' War. She lived through the Black Death. And so trying to see how can you see and live through the kind of suffering that she did and still be able to believe that, it's very comforting for me that people have done that and that there are those kinds of witnesses and those guides. And even though perhaps our situation is different, it's also not. We're still trying to struggle with how do we keep on in something that can seem, is there any point to any of this? And one of the treasures I do find about Catholicism is that there's lots of voices and witnesses and friends who have already done that. And with the entire idea of the communion of saints aren't simply, nice little role models from 600 years ago, but are somehow really present and active even now. And that is one of the things that I at least can find some consolation in.
And I guess I'd say too, you're not alone. Not just the Holy Spirit, but there are so many folks. I mean, just this call alone is a demonstration that there are people who are engaged in conversation about how we become more inclusive, more Christ-like church, a church that truly and unapologetically welcomes everyone, wholly as themselves.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of overlap in democracy and synodality, and I say we insist on it. Olivia, you're up.
Thanks. As I was listening to all of you share tonight, I kept thinking about freedom. That was like a word that kept coming to mind for me. And this is a half-baked question, so bear with me on this and take this in any direction you feel is right. But I'm wondering if we could think about if it's possible to think about queerness and queer identity not simply as an identity, but also as a spiritual practice of freedom. And I'm wondering if I could just put that out on the floor and have any of our wonderful panelists just think about that and offer some reflections, because it's really in my head right now. So I wanted to throw that out there. Thank you all.
So I will meet your. Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
I'll meet your half-baked question with kind of a half-baked response. This is just kind of what sort of is coming to me. But one of the things that I have found with queerness as being part of a spiritual practice is that I think it does. And I think this kind of goes back into the idea of not having the script. It does require almost this openness, that that does make one free. I mean, at least in my own kind of my own personal narrative, my own personal journey. I mean, I can tell from those earlier days, from like before my breakdown 20 years ago to after, I feel much freer than I did then. I actually think I probably spoke more then, but I think it was almost more out of almost a compulsion and a need to prove. Whereas I feel like I'm much more comfortable in kind of my own skin, so to speak. And I feel like most people, whether they're LGBT or not, they need that, right? Like all of us have to figure out what is it to be who we are, who we're made as, and to become comfortable with that. And I think that one of the advantages of queerness is that it lays that out to you very starkly, which can, depending on how one responds to that, be a real problem. But it also can really help you to move forward in that spiritual journey in a way that I think other people might find it much easier to hide from. And in that way, I think that there is a connection between embracing one's queerness and that capacity for freedom.
Yeah, I was actually thinking along really similar lines to what Andy said. I think that I find a lot of freedom in just being able to color outside the lines, or know like there is no coloring book. Like it's all open, blank, open spaces. And that really helps me to, in my spirituality, have that same attitude of kind of interior freedom, to encounter God as God actually is, and not just as I feel like maybe God should be. Just like I think God is trying to encounter me as I actually am, not as I think maybe I should be. That we can be much more present to one another because of that.
I think something that we can actually take from our Jewish siblings is this idea of wrestling with God. That the story of Jacob becoming Israel, because he wrestled with a heavenly messenger who tradition says was God, and I think I have had to figure out my life, my faith, my queerness with fear and trembling, and to wrestle with God in the midst of that, and to know that God was with me in the midst of that, and to echo what has already been said. There's a freedom in that authenticity, that that if you can't show up to your relationship with God authentically, what relationship can you show up to authentically?
This is really not a good answer to your question, but I'd like to emphasize two things that we've kind of hit around. One was the importance of role models for young Catholics or young people, period, that are struggling with their sexuality, but particularly young Catholics, to know that there are other Catholics out there that are still in the church or fighting for a place, their place in the church. And that I think it's important for all of us, the LGBT individuals and their allies, to as much as we can stay within the church, because that's what's going to change the church. We're not going to be able to change it from being outside. It's from being inside and pushing the boundaries as opposed to trying pulling them. And I think we've seen some within the church. Some areas more than others, but I think I know in our area we've seen changes, and it's going in the right direction. Slowly, but at least in the right direction.
Thank you all. This wraps up, I think, the Q&A part, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to our future church friends for their closing insights and for prayer.
Thanks so much, Nick, and thank you, really, everyone. I feel like I've been to church today. My heart is full, and in a very real way, I feel like this was Eucharistic, that we were breaking open our lives and our hopes and our joy for each other, for nourishment, for strength. So thank you, everyone. This was just a really beautiful moment. And thank you, everyone who joined. It's really, I say this often, but it's just a really beautiful way to show up for yourself and for each other, to join one of these Future Church Zooms. We are a community that seeks to be a place where everyone, as I think I'm really beautifully said, to show up holy as themselves, knowing that they are holy. And that's what we long to be here at Future Church. So thank you for creating that space where everyone who spoke tonight can show up holy as themselves and know themselves to be holy. And a big thank you to Olivia on our staff, who had such a big hand in putting this entire series together, and to Martha, who wrote that beautiful, beautiful prayer that we opened all of our sessions with. So thank you, everyone. I am going to